Welcome back to Dragon Ball Dissection's look at the television version of the Freeza Arc. And Merry Christmas! Happy Holidays! If you're like me, happy 11-hour-long day at work. However you're celebrating, thanks for spending some of it with me today. And since about half of the Freeza Arc takes place on Christmas Eve, we might as well be here, right? In Part 1, we explored a lot of the early filler. In Part 2, we delved into the production problems that began catching up to them around this time. In Part 3, we used Freeza Arc filler to explore what constitutes good filler. Finally, today we look at the end of the arc. Despite some less than optimal filler in the latter half, when the storyline does come to an end, the TV series institutes some good changes, although not without their own problems. While the manga severs the break lines and delivers the conclusion of this story with the speed of a school kid stuffing her backpack and running out the door of the final bell on a Friday, the television series seizes on the perfect opportunity to pay off the setup of the entire arc. On the one hand, I find it a huge improvement that we actually get resolution in regards to the whole reason they went to Namek rather than some throwaway text over reused panels. It resonates much more so than Toriyama cares to do. I almost compared it to the additions I talked about last time at the beginning of the arc, but in that case, the emotional payoff was improved. Here, it's more accurate for me to say that it was added, because the original has no emotional payoff. As much as I'm predisposed to abuse that big dumb ending, I can't help but feel there's a reason why Toriyama glossed over some of it. It's more satisfying to see the characters come back to life and their loved ones' reactions to that. However, these are moments that capture the emotional core of the story, but trample all over the logic of the narrative. Normally that probably wouldn't bother me, but this is a huge lapse. Yamcha comes back to life and is dropped into a pond. Tenshinhan and Chaozu magically appear in front of Purunga. You guys remember that Goku had to run back along the Serpentine Road, right? That served as a pivotal plot point in the Saiyan arc. How does this work, especially given that you come back to life where your body is a major device at this very moment of the story? I'm not even sure if I can say which version is better. Well, okay, Gohan saying goodbye to Dende is a definite net gain. The music, the direction, the timing, it's perfect. Everything else, it's a major improvement in one sense, but just as big a step back in another sense. It's a wash. Now I should shift gears to Vegeta because there's a lot going on with him at the end of the story, especially in this version. The manga blinks everyone to Earth without anything of consequence happening to him. However, in the anime, rather than stand around, he gets his butt moving and makes his way to the battle in time to witness Goku having definitively achieved Vegeta's dying wish. If you want to be generous, you could assign this as a motivation to all the differences in behavior anime Vegeta exhibits in this arc compared to his Toriyama counterpart. Some applications are more dubious than others, but a few I think can fit. But depending on the episode, Vegeta is excited at Goku's ascension, gleeful at his impending doom, threatening to make good on his promise to conquer Earth, which he never does, or waxing philosophical about his prior experiences with Frieza. While the accompanying flashback is interesting in how it places Nappa and Raditz, two characters who came and went before Frieza was introduced, into that hierarchy, it makes a big boo-boo. All three of them come out of this narrative excursion convinced that Frieza blew up their planet, despite their future selves clearly not knowing that. But, I'd hardly consider Vegeta a reliable narrator, and since the only people who could prove him wrong are dead, maybe he didn't want all the Namekians to think he was a chump. I don't believe that in the slightest, but you're free to do so if you want. The best part is when Gohan confronts him over his callousness about Goku's supposed death. Vegeta beats the crap out of him and then flies away in disgust, never to be seen again. Oh, until the next episode where he's back under his usual tree, offering his helpful manga advice about how to successfully bring Goku back to life. And Gohan tries to shake his hand because... ignore what happened in the last episode. It's not even the only time this arc that filler writers didn't seem to communicate with each other. The Ginyu make a ruckus in Kaio's house. Kaio and the others notice them and draw them out. In the next episode, Kaio comes out of his house as if unaware of any visitors, as if the ruckus had begun outside. And the worst part is, I have to take back what I said because both of those episodes were apparently written by Toda Hiroshi, who apparently failed to communicate with himself. Either that or someone higher up really screwed him over. Actually, both the Vegeta episodes credit him for the scenario too. I can't even stop there. Jeice complains they haven't posed in a long time, and Goku complains he hasn't used a Kamehameha in a long time, when they both did so earlier that same day! Anyway, back to Vegeta. Once he's invited back to Capsule Corporation, he spots opportunity in Chi-Chi's unused capsule spaceship, and steals it to chase after Goku once he finds out the latter is alive. Yes! This is what needed to happen. I don't care if it primarily exists to keep Vegeta out of the way for the upcoming filler story arc. Once again, if you'd like to extrapolate, I find this a more compelling assignation for him being motivated by actually seeing Goku. This is how it should have been in the manga. Sure, we still get Vegeta living on Earth for 130 days while completely neglecting to subjugate it, but it's infinitely more plausible for his character to jump on a ship in this case, and get out of there! And while I'll get a bit more into it when we get to the TV Cell arc, it makes it so he's not just yucking it up with the gang eating barbecue for over a year, living comfy cozy with no explanation and no purpose. This alone makes the entire Chi-Chi subplot worth it. Had that one random episode not decided to remind us that Vegeta should be wanting to take over Earth, this would be perfect, but overall it's still a vast improvement. I mentioned the Bardock special in part 2, which brings me to a long-awaited topic. Well, I could have talked about it in my video for the Bardock special, but I purposely didn't then because that video was already packed. So now I've spent nearly 3 years wondering when I could possibly bring it up again. But since it's technically an episode of the Freeza Arc, that makes it relevant. So in that video, I mentioned I hate the title of the Bardock special, a final solitary battle, the father of Z-Warrior Son Goku, who challenged Frieza, because it introduces the term Z-Warrior into the animated canon. I'm not sure if it existed in any capacity prior to that, but this is definitely the first time it shows up within the series itself. I absolutely, positively hate that term as a descriptor for the Dragon Ball characters. Now it's time to talk about why, because having left it like I did then, you may not be surprised that I've been asked about it a lot. As so many times before, I know that I'm in the minority about this, and that for reasons I simply cannot fathom, a lot of people seem to hold this term in high esteem. But there are many layers to my hate. The first is purely subjective, a gut reaction. I think it sounds stupid. This isn't like Sailor Senshi. Zeto Senshi doesn't tell us anything about these characters. But that brings me to my bigger problem. What does the Z in Z-Warrior signify? Oh, it's the Z in Dragon Ball Z, obviously. Yeah, it's the Z that has no meaning other than to incorrectly identify that the series was close to ending. That's a lovely name for this group of characters. But that very much limits its utility. Are these guys retroactively called Z-Warriors? It's mostly the same guys doing the same things. Do they stop being Z-Warriors here? Or here? Do we call them something else instead? Now that Dragon Ball Kai has re-edited the same material, are they the Kai Warriors in this section of the story? Look at that. It's a name that's only occasionally relevant even within its own property. That'd be like calling the Ghostbusters the Vigo Fighters, or Frodo, Sam, Aragorn, and the others the Return of the King Gang, or the Corleone family the Part 2 Father. Of course, that brings me to the original manga continuity, for which the term is absolutely irrelevant, because there is never a Z in the title, giving the term even less utility. You could not come up with any more of a non sequitur than calling these guys Z-Warriors. You might as well call them the Dishwasher Pantyhose Jungle Gym Fighters, and it would make just as much sense. The only time the letter Z exists in any substantial capacity in the Dragon Ball manga is in regards to this sword. That means the only character in Toriyama's Dragon Ball who would have any justification to be called by such a name is this guy. That's right, Gohan is the only Z-Warrior. Oops, he broke it, guess we can't call him that anymore. But what do we call them? We have to call them something. Well, no, we don't. Not every ragtag group of characters has to have a specific name, that's silly. They're not the flippin' Justice League, or even a bowling league. They're a bunch of martial artists who hang out together and punch things. But if you really feel they need one, Toriyama already gave them one years before this stupid descriptor became a thing. He called them the Dragon Team. In my opinion, that's a much better name. It doesn't sound like some 90s extreme sports dirt bike team. It ties into the Dragon Balls, which serve as pivotal items for the entire franchise, both in and out of universe. It's more inclusive to the characters who inhabit that world and friend group, as opposed to just the ones who punch things. And while I questioned Dragon Ball Kai, that's exactly what it uses too. Because it makes sense! Whew. It felt good to get all of that off my chest. I don't care if you think I'm crazy, it needed to be said. Z-Warriors is a stupid, nonsensical term. We really didn't need any more pointless overemphasizing of Z in Dragon Ball. The fact that the Bardock special officially introduced it is the one blemish on its otherwise gleaming legacy. You know what else is a blemish on Bardock? Dragon Ball Minus. Oh, did I write that? Force of habit. It's true, but this time what I meant to say was filler. Well, that's somewhat reductive, but you can't deny the TV staff gets a lot of mileage out of reused Bardock footage during this arc. And why not? They're proud of it. The best part is that the story demands it at one point. In this weird recursive gesture, since Toriyama had redrawn elements from the Bardock special to put into the manga, that meant that when the anime got to the same point, they didn't have to draw it. They already had. But that wasn't even the first time they recycled Bardock special footage. Remember that the Bardock special aired in between fighting Gerdo and fighting Recoome. Just before the fight with Frieza begins, they throw in some of the Bardock special. As I mentioned a few months ago in my episode on the Broly movie, the anime takes Frieza and Vegeta's brief dialogue about the King of the Saiyans and the destruction of planet Vegeta and turns it into its own flashback, featuring King Vegeta's frustration at living under Frieza's thumb and his eventual doomed attempt at a coup. Several of its elements present severe contradictions to the Bardock special. In the special, little Vegeta's on another planet. Here, he's on Frieza's ship. In the special, at the same time Frieza's supposed to be killing King Vegeta, he's in a completely different looking room preoccupied with this random Saiyan who's making mincemeat of his soldiers. Nonetheless, the flashback still caps off with Frieza blowing up planet Vegeta by utilizing stock footage from the special, including a little glimpse of Bardock himself. It's pretty easy to spot the leap in art quality. Still, I'd take all of that over them inserting new Bardock material into things. In filler segments during Goku's fight with Frieza, Frieza refers to Bardock by name. Goku hallucinates a naked Vegeta, wherein Vegeta mentions him by name and ethereally speaks through him. Even Bardock's crew briefly appear. This is the kind of stuff I hate. As I said when I reviewed the Bardock special, part of the reason it works is because Bardock is so expendable as a character. His last stand ultimately amounts to nothing. No one knows or understands what he's been through or what he was doing. He dies alone and forgotten. That's part of what makes his story a tragedy. Toriyama at least seemed to understand that well enough to include Bardock in Frieza's mind only in the sense of, you remind me of that random guy. Frieza should not know his name, and Goku certainly shouldn't know that Bardock's his father. But, we gotta capitalize on the popularity of this thing we did! Ugh. Here's another fun example of the left hand not paying attention to what the right hand is doing. To show the effects of Frieza's destructive blast on planet Namek, episode 97 cuts away to a shot of the Grand Elder's plateau crumbling, only for it to be intact again 3 episodes later when the Grand Elder comes back to life. Then in episode 102, it falls again! I'm not sure if that's the most resilient or unluckiest bit of rock in the history of the universe. Incidentally, episode 97 also shows Frieza's ship collapsing into the abyss. Whoops, we still need that too. Either nobody gave a crap about this show, or they were so in danger of catching up to the manga that even major plot points a handful of chapters out were beyond them. Considering episode 97 only came out a few weeks after the chapter in which Goku uses Frieza's ship, the latter is certainly plausible. Speaking of the Grand Elder, I'd like to talk a little bit about a voice actor named Takaguchi Junpei. Up until the Freeza arc, he'd really only voiced one pivotal character in the series, Uranai Baba. And I love him in that role. It's like Brad Bird as Edna Mode in The Incredibles, Takaguchi's basso voice made Uranai Baba wonderfully distinct, in much the same but opposite way Nozawa defined Son Goku. In the Freeza arc, Takaguchi took on two male characters, the Grand Elder and Purunga, and did a fine job with both of them. However, for some reason in between the Grand Elder's death and resurrection, he stopped voicing characters for Dragon Ball Z. Although he is credited as Purunga in the last episode of this arc, so I don't even know. But it was certainly a bit jarring to hear the Grand Elder sound completely different upon returning from the dead. But he didn't stick around that long anyway. Uranai Baba does not appear in this arc, but when she ultimately does return, she's recast with Tanaka Mayumi, the voice actress for Kuririn and Yajirobe. She does a fine job, like she always does, and she makes Uranai Baba sound like the old crone you'd expect her to sound like, with a typical high, crackling old lady voice. But it lacks the distinctiveness of Takaguchi's version. If I'm going to bring up voices at all, I have to at least mention the one that steals the show. Nakao Ryusei, the voice of Frieza. But what can I even say about him? Unlike the polar opposite but equally wonderful performances Furukawa Toshio turned in as Piccolo No. 2 after he'd cut his teeth on General Blue, Nakao's performance as Frieza makes you wonder why he was ever wasted as someone as worthless and generic as Tambourine. This is where the man shines, consistently bringing forth appropriate amounts of faux politeness with that hint of ever-present danger bubbling beneath the surface. He's simultaneously regal and petulant, playful and terrifying. It's hard to imagine a more perfect casting choice. Finally, while the manga version continues straight into the next arc, the animated version doesn't. It definitively ends. Peace reigns, tearful goodbyes are said, the characters settle into their normal lives, the sun literally sets on the story. This has the consequence of pushing the last several pages of the last chapter of the Freeza arc into the Cell arc. I certainly feel there are merits to Toriyama's approach. There's a sadistic trick in Toriyama allowing the new arc to bleed into the old one. Having Frieza return at the very end of his arc makes it unclear whether this really is the end of the arc. It obfuscates Frieza's nature as a red herring and causes the audience to wonder if this fight is truly going to continue even longer. It could even be argued it's the reason why Toriyama skims over the resolution of the arc's plot points, to make it more believable that it's not an ending. The anime's approach of instituting a hard dividing line plus 10 unrelated episodes in between Frieza's appearances makes it a bit more obvious that a new story is beginning, regardless of whether or not you've read the manga. That said, I have to come down heavily on the side of the animated ending. Even if Toriyama was barreling through the ending for a specific purpose, I find it extremely short-sighted to jip such a lengthy and involved story the kind of denouement it deserved. But, I've already talked about that. Putting aside what I said before about my mixed reception for the resurrection parts, the rest is spot on. Remember that the story has been running continuously for almost 3 years at this point. The last actual break was Goku and Chi-Chi flying off together. In both versions, this is the first time Gohan has actually been seen inside his own home. The story needs to slow down and stop right here. The Freeza arc deserves it, the characters deserve it, and the audience deserves time to catch their breath. But even if pacing were not a concern, there is no practical way the TV staff would have ever considered using the manga ending. It would have been production suicide. The manga's ending would not have allowed them to insert any additional material. And as we established in part 2, the opportunity was something they desperately needed. To that end, they created their own story, which we will take a look at next week to close out Dragon Ball Dissection December. The Freeza arc broke my record for most number of episodes when I covered its original version. I suppose it's only fitting that its DBD TV counterpart has done the same. 4 episodes! I used to cover whole story arcs in 3! But the TV Freeza arc is as fascinating as the story it's adapting. Clearly it's a mixed bag for me, as enjoyable if not more so as something to be studied for its decisions than to simply watch for its story. Just as I feel the Freeza arc introduces many story and fighting tropes that ultimately damage Dragon Ball's quality, the TV Freeza arc likewise serves as a turning point in its animated history, dragging the overall quality down with it. But while I've maintained the manga at this point as an overall downward spiral, does that likewise hold true for the anime's production elements? Well, we'll see. It should be no surprise now that a series that had to defer to the production of franchise-based movies is now depending on a movie character to lift it out of the hole it dug for itself. That's right, it's time to explore the filler storyline so infamous that I had to give it its own episode. Check back on New Year's Eve for the Garlic Jr. arc. See you there! So I have a small correction to make in regards to Part 2. Studio Junio animates 8 episodes of this arc, not 7. Episode 64 was supervised by Sato Masaki instead of Maeda Minoru, and since Junio employed a lot of Toei animators, I mistook Sato for one of them. I apologize for the mistake.